Ishya Jain, Beyond Pacifism, about Jain principles. Hold on, I lost the page. Um, how Jain principles call us to serve. Okay, Ishya Jain.
I'm just going to share. Okay. Jai Janindra, everyone. My name is Isha, and I am a Seva project team lead at YJA. And today I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about a lot as we've built YJA Seva arm. So I'll be discussing Jain theory of change and service as I see it and framing it within today's theme of interreligious dialogue. So here's just a quick roadmap for my talk. I'll start with a brief introduction on the context and why I'm even asking this question, and then I'll walk through what existing, mostly Western literature says about Jainism, kind of challenge that and introduce three frameworks from Jain philosophy that I think actually push us towards service and justice, and then I'll close with some interreligious reflection. So just for some personal background, I am a first year student at Georgetown studying international economics. And for those of us who don't know, Georgetown is a Jesuit institution, meaning that it's rooted in the Catholic tradition of the Society of Jesus. And one of the most distinctive things about going to a Jesuit school is that they emphasize that it's not about what you learn in the classroom, but more about how you apply it and how you reflect on it. So um, the three pillars that Georgetown says really defines a Jesuit education are faith that does justice, being men and women for others, and a serious commitment to interreligious dialogue. And I think you can really see these everywhere on campus. There's a Center for Social Justice that has all kinds of volunteer programs. There's required coursework on the history of race, power, and justice. And Georgetown actually has dedicated sacred spaces for Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, and Jain students. As you can see right here, this is our Dharmic Meditation Center. And I think this space is really rare across college campuses and really special. On the left, you can see a murti of Mahavir Bhagwan. We also have a required course on theology and philosophy called The Problem of God. And one quote from that class that really stuck with me comes from the Jesuit thinker John Courtney Murray. And he says, "No man may say that the problem of God is not his problem." So obviously, we don't have time to unpack that entirely, but the idea is that theological questions about justice and about what we owe to each other aren't just for religious people, they're for all people, they're universal. And that quote kind of launched me into thinking about how Jainism fits into this idea of social justice. And this brings me to the central question of this talk, which is how does Jainism call its followers to service and social justice? And I'm asking this question because Jainism has a reputation both within and outside the community of being a very inward looking religion. It's very focused on individual moral purity and nonviolence and withdrawal from the world. And while I understand that, I don't think it's the full picture. So that's kind of what we're going to be digging into today. So when people think about Jainism or talk about Jainism in relation to social action, there's a few concepts or a few views on Jainism that keep coming up. The first one is pacifism. Jainism's central principle of ahimsa or nonviolence is often read as passive, and related to that, related to that is the idea of withdrawal, particularly for Jain monks and nuns. There's this sense of detachment from the material world that is part of the path to liberation. And then there's what I would call exclusive or limited seva, which is that service in Jainism is really only directed towards other Jains through dan to temples or serving Jain monks. And finally, there's the emphasis on individual purity or the idea that your karma is your own and liberation is a solo journey. So I think none of these views are entirely wrong, but I would argue that they're incomplete, and that if you look more carefully at Jain philosophy, there's a much stronger case for ethical engagement and social action than these views would suggest. So this is my thesis. Contrary to prevailing assumptions of passivity, Jainism actively calls its followers towards ethical action and social justice. I'm going to make this case through three Jain frameworks. The first is Samyak charitra, or right conduct. The second is atheistic interdependence, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I promise it isn't. And then the third one is nimitta and upadaan, which is a distinction between the instrumental and primary causes. So on the first framework, Samyak charitra, which translates to right conduct. In Jain philosophy, liberation or moksha requires three things that work in tandem: right knowledge or samyak gyan, right faith, samyak darshan, and right conduct. And um, the key point of Ratnatraya, or these three jewels, is that you can't have any two without the third. So knowledge and faith, if they don't actually shape how you live, are incomplete. And belief must translate to action. So for Jain lay people, there's a set of modern vows called anuvrats, and these are kind of scaled down versions of the full vows that monks take. And the point of them is to let ordinary people, people who are still embedded in this material world, um, apply Jain principles to their daily lives without having to renounce everything. So one of the implications, in my opinion, of Samyak Charitra is that you have to actively avoid causing harm, not just in deed and in action, but also in speech and thought. So I think this naturally extends to not participating in or benefiting from unjust systems, but it also implies what I would call a sense of positive ahimsa, which is not just refraining from harm, but also actively contributing to others' well-being through charity and service. And this is well documented in a lot of Gandhi's writings. So it's not enough just to not do bad things, but you're also called to do good actions. The second framework is atheistic interdependence, and I think this is the part of Jainism that I think is actually the most interesting for someone who hasn't heard of Jainism before, and it's an underappreciated aspect of Jainism. Jainism is fundamentally atheistic because there's no creator, there's no divine savior, there's no providence guiding history towards some good end. And that may sound like a contradiction, but Jainism, in my opinion, is more like a rigorous ethical system than a theistic faith tradition in the Western sense. So why does the atheism matter for social justice? I think it's because if there's no divine plan, then there's no theodicy that can justify inequality. So you can't say, as theistic traditions might say, that God works in mysterious ways or that suffering is part of a larger plan. There's no divine intervention in Jainism, and that makes us the primary actors. The Jain principle that I think really captures this is parasparo pagraho jivarnam, or souls render service to one another. This means that all living beings are inherently interdependent, and that kind of interdependence creates a direct ethical obligation. And to harm another is to introduce violence into a shared world, whereas to serve another is to fulfill your most basic function as a living soul. But for when I was first introduced to this, I thought that this would kind of lead to a savior complex, which is kind of contradictory to Jainism. But I think that's where the next framework comes in. So the next framework is Nimitta and Upadaan, and this is a philosophical piece that I think most directly answers the savior complex concern. So in Jain philosophy, there is a distinction between nimitta, which is an instrumental or external cause, and upadaan, which is the primary or internal cause. In Jainism, when you perform seva, you are only ever the nimitta, or in other words, you are the instrument instead of the source of good. The person that you are serving has their own upadaan, aka their own capacity for growth and liberation. So instead of fixing them, you're only creating a favorable condition. You're delivering, in a sense, what was already rightfully theirs because of their own karma. And I think this works in both directions. So for the person receiving seva, your act of service can help them overcome obstacles or progress on their own path. But for you, the sevak, the one serving, the act itself, done with the right intention or bhav, is also a nimitta for your own spiritual growth. It can reduce ego, purify your intention, and also deepen your practice of Jainism. I think this is a bit more of an abstract concept, so I like to understand it through an example. So, if someone was motivated to pursue liberation or moksha after listening to a certain guru's pravachan or lecture, then the guru acts as the nimitta, and the soul of the person who is inspired to pursue moksha is the upadaan. So without the necessary purusharth or effort, the guru's lecture would not have any effect on the soul. And I think this kind of mitigates any concerns of uh, a savior complex that someone might have with the Jain philosophy of seva. So to kind of pull this all together, performing seva with the right pav, the right inner attitude, means that you're doing it from a place of genuine humility and equality. So you acknowledge that all souls are equal in their potential to attain enlightenment. And this is also where we kind of can loop back Samyak charitra. So as sevaks, we're seeking to embody right conduct by actually applying what we know and believe to how we act in the real world. So it's the, again, integration of the Ratnatraya, or the right knowledge, faith, and action. So I want to close by zooming out a little bit. Interreligious dialogue, in my opinion, is a deeply South Asian concept and was really emphasized during the Mughal Empire, especially during the reign of Akbar, and has continued to be important throughout the Indian independence movement. The idea that different traditions have something to learn from each other and that engaging with another religion deepens your own understanding of your own religion is also integral of Jainism's concepts of anikantvad. So I think one of the things that's really amazing when you look across traditions is how social justice and service show up as commitments in almost every religion. And there's this convergence around the idea that we all have obligations to each other. I think where traditions may differ is more in explaining the why. So, what motivates action? Is it divine command? Is it love of God? Is it karmic consequences? Or is it the logic of being alive in a shared world, as Jainism says it is? Traditions, I think, also differ in how they understand suffering and the problem of evil. So, in Jainism, without a god to explain
Mhm.
suffering, it's purely the result of karma and action, which actually, in my opinion, makes the call to act even more urgent. So, just to wrap it up, I would want to push back on the idea that Jainism is just a religion of withdrawal and pacifism. I think the message of service really resonates across traditions and even beyond religion entirely. Service and justice are universal values. So, it doesn't matter how you ground them, whether that's in Jesuit philosophy and Jain philosophy or just in a basic commitment to human dignity, the invitation is the same. We must engage and we must serve and we have to do it thoughtfully. So thank you.